we get going.
You are good to go.
Good evening, everybody, for this RSU 13 virtual special school board meeting to adopt our budget for the upcoming fiscal year. It is now 6:03, and we'll call the meeting to order, and the superintendent will call the roll.
Lauren Andrews.
Here.
Carol Backoffner.
Here.
Douglas Curtis Jr.
Here.
Tom Pico.
Here.
Mark Lewis.
Here.
Susan Thomas.
Here.
Kelsey Everett.
Here.
Gerald Winan. Amy Williams Beers.
Here.
Do we have a quorum?
We do.
All right, thank you. So now to mute everybody's microphone and to say, all right, thank you very much. 5 on business items. A, to approve the superintendent's recommended FY21 budget. Is there a motion?
I so move.
Carol, and seconded by Susan. Thank you. Okay, so John, do you want to lead things off here and then give it to Pete, or whatever you want to do?
Well, so we've had one board meeting to discuss the budget where we first proposed it. The board had directed me to present a zero tax impact budget, and we've done that. Since then, we've had 2 budget hearings for the public to comment on. The last one being last night at 7 p.m. We've received multiple questions, which we've gone through and answered. And I think tonight, I'm recommending the budget for the board's approval.
All right, thank you. Pete, do you want to go next to explain anything?
Is there anything else that the board would like to hear from, or what's the pleasure, I guess, of the board? I have nothing further to clarify. If you want me to go through the entire presentation, I'm happy to do that too.
No, that's okay. Yeah.
Okay.
No, I just didn't know if there's anything else you wanted to say tonight. You sent us an email. You also said last night that you were going to get more guidance from the state, maybe on our process to complete this.
So the process is we have a little more guidance that so the process will be that the board will adopt its budget, and then we will issue warrants to call the referendum, which is July 14th. We will also issue warrants to call a public hearing. So this was the piece that was a little confusing. When I read that we were going to call a public hearing, it certainly made sense to me that we would try to call those public hearings prior to the board actually adopting a final number, which is why it seemed rush, to kind of to Tom's point the other day. I still think that was a good idea to do this before the board actually fixed a number before the referendum. But we will do another mandated public hearing on June 25th. And that will be at 6 o'clock, and that will be virtual. All the information about the public hearing will be on our website, including all the documentation required to do that. The board, the votes, the warrant calling it, the process, and the budget with the intent, with the four articles, the 4 questions that will be given during the referendum. So there are 4 questions: one on the school budget, one on the adult ed budget, one on the Midcoast School Technology budget, and one on the Midcoast School Technology adult ed budget. And those will be presented online through the public hearing, and the city and town clerks will get their ballots on Friday, so they can send out ballots with their state ballots starting next week for absentee voting.
Okay. Yes, Doug.
Okay, so since the last two meetings that we had Monday and Tuesday, I've had a couple people talk to me about state subsidies and other things that we discussed in detail the other night. I had a couple questions I really wanted to ask Pete and maybe John and get your input on this. Right now, as I understand it, we are due to get an additional $1.1 million above what we got last year from the state. Is that around the correct number?
Yes.
Okay. So a lot of people, myself included, don't necessarily feel that the state is going to come through with that. And so the question has become, should we take that $1.1 million out of the budget? And I've heard all the other reasons why we should leave it in. And then if we do get it, put it into like a contingency fund that the superintendent with the board approval could distribute as he sees fit.
Let me jump in and say that it would be great to have a reserve fund or a savings account going into this fiscal year to what we may get for major cuts or curtailment from the state. But we just don't know yet what's going to happen. We don't know what the revenues will be and what the amount would be if we're curtailed. We don't know if the federal government's going to help or not. And for us to have a huge savings account, so to speak, or reserve, we'd have to lay off a whole lot of staff. And I don't think that's fair at the moment because we just don't know. And as John keeps saying, and he can explain this more, but I think we all envision that we're going to need our staff even more than we normally do in order to reach out and engage students who are partially at home or somewhat at home, or during whatever we have to do to get through our COVID year as a school district. So I hear what you're saying, Doug, and I would love to have that kind of thing available. I just don't see a path to do it right now for the reasons I mentioned.
Okay, and that's fine. And I know we've discussed this issue in numerous ways in different times. I want to be as transparent as possible with the public, but also not give away anything that we're doing behind the scenes. So I guess my feeling is this: if we leave this money in the budget and we get it, that's I guess it's a wonderful thing. But if we don't get it, my bigger fear is what John talked about the other night is we'll just have massive layoffs across the district and we'll have unemployment for everyone for 2 or 3 weeks or some other furlough or whatever the program is. And I don't want that either. And I don't think anybody does. So I'm just trying to be smart about how we address this because I clearly don't want to lay people off that we need. But I think back to John's experience in Belfast, where they ended the school year early. I believe they laid everybody off for 2 weeks. And it was real serious, obviously. I mean, in the long-term impact on students, I don't know what that was. But, the other option is to lay off, individual instructors or teachers or administrative staff or whatever, and permanently eliminate their jobs. And we don't really want to do that either. So I hate to put money in a budget that I'm not sure we're going to receive during this pandemic, where people are unemployed, people are taking salary reductions and things like that. I really want to be smart. I want the public to understand why we're doing what we're doing, if it makes sense. And if it doesn't make sense, we need to speak to that. And that's all I'm trying to say. I don't know what else to say. That's my biggest concern.
Yep. I think we all share that. Anybody else with any thoughts or ideas to what Doug is talking about?
I can kind of address. Go ahead, John. You can talk about the reasons why it shouldn't be done that way, and I can go into a different.
Well,
Here again, I'll say, I think the same thing I said in one of the budget hearings, and that is, we have to plan for what we know, but develop contingencies for what we don't know. And, behind the scenes, that's what we're doing. We're trying to develop those contingencies, but really to do what was suggested there, it really isn't practical for any number of reasons. Pete can talk about the technicalities of it, but again, even planning for the fall with my administrators, we're planning for what we know, and we're developing contingencies for what we don't know. So it isn't as though we're unaware of the fact that it would be possible for a curtailment to occur, and we're looking at that, and we would try to mitigate that in the least impactful way possible. To do it, it is not easy, but we're already looking down the road at what we might do in that eventuality. And I would rather plan with the subsidy in the budget. I think it would be much cleaner than trying to guess at this point, and then end up really with a problem on our hands. So, Pete, do you have some further thoughts on that?
I do, because we've really kind of struggled with how to do this the right way. And the their feedback. Somebody's. I'm going to mute everybody for a second. Okay. The so with the state subsidy, because this is what we've been given according from the state in the budget documents that we get from them in the subsidy report, we have got to use that in our budget calculation. The documents that you got today all include those numbers, include the accounting of that, what we report when we'll be reporting our budget to the state within 30 days of it passing. And they will make sure that our budget documents that we put to the public match their documents that they put out to us. So the only way to do this, so the two ways of doing this are one, if we thought that we might not get $1 million, we would have to cut that from the local share. We would have to cut $1 million of revenue from the local share. And in doing so, we still wouldn't protect ourselves from a curtailment. So if we cut the $1 million from the local share, we'd have to immediately cut $1 million of expenditures. And then if we get a subsidy cut on top of that, we'd have to do it again, because we wouldn't have the authorization to spend that money. So being authorized to spend it and using the subsidy is really the only way we can do it. And given that the board's request was zero tax impact, that's what we did. But like John said, now it's really, the onus is on us to begin plans, and we have been already, to mitigate any possible decrease by not spending the authorized money. So I think that that's what we need the next couple of months to do, is to continue to challenge all of us to do things better, to do things with fewer people, to take advantage of any retirements or any turnover in staff, to take advantage of technology, to take advantage of some of the things that we might use to save money long-term that we might be able to access through some of the CARES money, which is going to be there too. For example, we're looking into kind of a touchless registration system for all our students. That might save time, and that might save staff hours throughout the district. We're looking at human resources technology that will allow us to onboard and offboard without using so much time, people time, face-to-face time. So I think the burden is really, given what we have to do and how we have to do this budget, is to make sure we just don't spend the money that we're authorized to spend.
Thank you. Any other thoughts or ideas or questions right now? Yes, Tom, better known as Jewel. because you know that
Yes,
Google thing.
that's right.
Yeah,
There.
there you go.
Um, so, thank you for the explanation, Pete. And I think, there's reasons that you lay out that make sense for why that's the case. And I think I can get on board with that and live with that, because, we've have before us pretty much a zero tax impact budget, although it's, obviously some towns are impacted differently than others. But I guess first, just a side note, I hadn't really thought about it, but what is the what's happening with the MCST budget? Are they also preparing a zero tax impact budget, or do you know? I'm just curious how that might ripple through to our communities.
I don't believe that their budget is tax impact neutral.
It's not clear yet, Pete. It's not clear yet.
Yeah.
Just as a board member there, just want to say that's not clear yet.
Not
It's a really good
finalized.
question, but it's not clear yet.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Thank you. So I guess where I'm wrestling with the budget before us is just in terms of how the dollars speak to our priorities. I'm really, seeing the first item on, the summary of regular instruction be up less than 1%, troubles me. I think, we've had a year last year when we had to make some reductions, and now through retirements and not filling positions, we're going to be in that spot again. I think we've discussed at length about, the quality of our special education program, and that it's top notch and that we value that. But I also think that, we continue to see big numbers there. And so I worry about that. And I worry about, and I know it's not exactly how it is, but I think it can be perceived and feel like a trade-off between the regular instruction line and the special education line. So I worry about that. I do, I also look at, transportation is a big line, and I still can't say that I'm totally comfortable with why that's up $250,000. So I'd love to maybe hear more about that. And I think we have to, even though it's not big dollars, I think the message about system administration going up, I understand the school board piece is insurance related and we don't have much choice about that. But I think that we have to, discuss, and I think John and Pete have been, coming and offering, to, I don't know if this has been discussed publicly, so maybe I shouldn't go there, but I think that we have to be really conscious about salary adjustments in this environment, and that this is a really tough time to do that when, we have an economy that's really faltering all around us. So I guess I would just say that those areas jump out at me as, while the bottom line, I think, is something that I can get on board with. I feel like that, some of the, how things are allocated are troubling me a little bit. So I'll just leave it at that for now, and we can, let other people ask questions. I just wanted to kind of give my 2 cents at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Other thoughts? Yes, Chelsea.
I received an email from a citizen, and I share this concern about the salary adjustments, as Tom so diplomatically put it, in this environment. And I asked Pete actually to tell me what the bottom line number is for salary adjustments for non-aligned staff. So Pete, I was wondering what that number was.
If you could entertain yourselves for a little bit, I can get it. I have it somewhere else.
I can keep talking.
John, you have an
No,
answer?
if I could interrupt here, Pete, if you please explain what non-aligned staff is for the public.
Oh, good point. Thanks. So we have staff who have contracts. So teachers, support staff, they're all on contract. But we have, I think, a dozen staff members who do not have contracts. And so those staff, is that banging audible?
It
Okay,
was.
I just want to jump in and say that it's misleading what you're saying. So we've got a teachers union, they're a collective bargaining unit. We've got a support staff union, which are a collective bargaining unit. All the other employees are not part of a collective bargaining agreement. They have an individual contract.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I definitely don't want to be misleading.
Yep.
So at any rate, these are, okay, so individual contracts. And what that means is that the salary raises are different than they are for other staff. And I'm concerned about how high those are because we are giving salary increases of sometimes 7%. And I think that, I don't think in any economic climate we should be doing that. But I think in this economic climate, we certainly shouldn't. And I would like to remove some or all of that. That's where I'd like a board discussion. I haven't quite nailed down the number, but I think we should be removing that because the perception here is that even if we do not, even if staff are foregoing those salary raises, we're still taking it from the taxpayers in a way that I feel very uncomfortable with. But I also feel very uncomfortable with making that change for some staff and not for other staff. So I think it's a really complex issue and I would really like to talk about it and walk through, honestly, I feel like there are a lot of competing ethics here. So I'd love to have some more.
So Chelsea, John, do you already have an answer for that?
Yeah, my answer is, so the superintendent recommends to the board any increases in anybody else's contract that's not in a collective bargaining unit. So the teachers have wage increases in the steps in their contract, as do support staff, but everybody else does not. So the superintendent would be the one to bring forward to the board for approval any increases in other salaries. So it's fully within the control of the board not to approve any increases in those kind of contracts. So there's nothing automatic about any of those. Let me finish. There's nothing automatic about any of those increases. It's all within the purview of the board. And I can tell you, and I said it before in the other meeting, so I think it's public knowledge that I am not in any way, shape, or form until such time as we are on solid financial footing and we know that we're not going to be impacted by a curtailment, going to bring recommendations for those kinds of increases. So that's just my position on it.
So I want to just clarify what I know that we can later make decisions on those, but my concern is that we don't make those decisions until after the budget is approved. So right now we are actually budgeting for those increases. So that's what I want to have the discussion about, is whether or not we should be budgeting for those increases at the moment. So now I'm going to turn it off and listen.
Okay, before Carol, John, do you have any response to that or not? Before Carol goes.
Well, I guess one response is, so if the board removed all that money and subsidy was not impacted by a curtailment, now the board has absolutely no ability to do anything. So if you have that money in the budget, it does not create a mandate to spend, but it gives you the ability to do so should the situation improve. And we've got to do that for the teachers, and we've got to do that for the support staff. I guess my other concern is that, it's, I guess, kind of difficult and late in the discussion to sort of spring that thought out there. And you've got every right to do it. I don't deny that, but it makes it difficult for us to respond to that, or to have even kind of a, fully in-depth, intelligent discussion. That's all.
All right, Carol, go ahead.
I was gonna say something along the lines of what John just said, and I think it's helpful for people to think about your own budget. You have so much money that you have planned for, but if you get a better deal on your car, you don't have to spend all the money you've budgeted for your car. And it's this, but if you budget too low, then you don't have any way to get back to fix that. And in our case, we would have to go back to a referendum for the public to ask them to approve additional monies for those increases should we have the ability to make them. So it's really, I consider it in some ways a contingency. We have the ability to do it, but we don't have to do it. If we don't have the contingency there for us to do it, it opens up a whole other can of worms, a whole other cost to the public for a ballot, etc. So I just hope that the people who are listening are really clear on that. Every penny that we have in the budget is a we can spend if needed item. And some things we really have to spend, and some things we may not have to spend as much. So that's what I was going to say.
Yeah, we're in the first year, finishing the first year of a contract with, as John said, teachers and support staff. That is a contract. We have no ability to change that contract. With the non-aligned staff that you're discussing, John has the ability to wait and then bring things forward when he feels is right. And then we, the 9 of us, vote on that. So that's clearly within our power. And Carol, you're right. It's something that we can choose to spend if our full subsidy is there, or choose not to, as one way to meet a gap in subsidy or the curtailment of subsidy. Chelsea, you had another question, I think.
I just wanted to apologize. I didn't mention this earlier. I didn't realize until Monday, because we got the numbers so recently, I didn't realize until Monday that we were budgeting for those, because John's been saying that staff aren't going to take those raises unless the curtailment doesn't happen. I think that's right. I didn't realize they were in the budget. And I did mention it to Pete when we spoke yesterday. So he was aware I was going to do this.
John.
Yeah, it's just difficult to deal with that in such short notice. And you're well within your right to bring it up. I have no problem with that at all. I do just want to reemphasize, though, that I have no authority whatsoever to approve those kind of salary increases. All I can do is recommend to the board. So it's all up to the board what they do. I think I'll just give my personal opinion. I know you guys know that I'll do that from time to time. I think it would send a very negative message just to unilaterally remove any kind of ability to do that right up front in the budget. I think I think people have been understanding. I think they do understand that times are tough, and we're not going to be recommending, a whole slate of salary increases. But for the board to just do that, I shudder for the effect that on the morale for the staff that it would have, because we're not going to do that for the teachers.
Okay, so
I think it'd be a big mistake, personally. That's all I'll say.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Doug, then Amy.
Okay, so I want to circle back to what I began talking about just briefly, and I heard Pete's explanation as to why we should keep the money in the budget, and I can buy into what he said. I would like to just mention that part of what I asked was, rather than, the superintendent, I guess, with board approval, and I understand that the public has to vote on the adult education portion and the Midco School of Technology. I understand those are all separate articles. But the rest of it, special ed, administration, general education, all that, I mean, we budget for these items, but I still believe the superintendent has the ability to move money between those articles. Am I correct on that?
The
school board does.
board has the ability to move money between the articles. I
Right, but
can't,
you can propose it and we can agree or disagree, right? But
yes,
the dollar amount will remain the same.
correct.
Okay,
And the movement of the money has to be within certain percentages as well. You can't just
Right.
move all the money from one article into another one, but the board does have some ability to do that.
okay, I didn't know that. So can you give me an example of what a percentage might be?
5%.
Yeah, I thought it was
5%, okay, all right, 5%.
That was 5%.
All right, so that's reasonable. So I guess my question would be this then. I don't think it's fair to have some employees get wage increases and other employees get no wage increase. I think we're one for all and all for one. If nobody gets them, nobody gets them. If one person gets them, they all get them. That's what I think. That's a personal opinion on my end. Given what we know today, if we go ahead and approve this budget with these wages increases in it, which are roughly around 750,000, and the public should know that the health insurance cost to the district has gone up an additional, I think 1.1 million, Pete, something like that. Is that right? Or over $1 million?
This year, or for next year,
Today,
just over 400,000. So
Just-
675,000 in salary increases is in the budget, and then over 400,000 in benefit increases.
Okay, so combined, it's about 1.1 million, correct? Roughly, a little bit less?
Yep.
All right, so that's what we're looking at for increases that we've already know about from either contractual agreements or because of health insurance, the price of that's going up. So we can't make a whole lot of change to that right there as it sits now. And I understand that. So that's where I came up with the idea about the contingency, whether we move money around, I don't know if that's within the 5% parameter or not, but if for some reason health insurance went down 200,000 or 50,000 or whatever the case may be, like Carol said, we don't have to spend that, but we got to have a place to put that. And for me, a contingency fund or reserve fund could be utilized for that. Certainly would be within 5% of whatever, whatever our overall budget would be. I'm just trying to understand, I don't want to lose any money from the state that we're going to be getting. I don't want to have to reconfigure what the towns are doing. We don't have time to do this because we're under such a tight schedule. But at the same time, I don't know how much flexibility we have to move between lines. And also at the same point, if for some reason we don't get this money back from the state before we get into what might happen or whatever, I would feel more comfortable. I'm okay with the budget as it is from what you're talking about. I agree with Tom though, maybe it might have to be redistributed within the line items because there is a perception that some of these line items, regardless of what the small amounts of money is, whether it's athletics, whether it's administration, whether it's special ed, they're all performing and doing better in this budget than say general education is, which of course is a much lower percentage increase. So I guess my overall feeling is anything that we can do to educate the public and to help ourselves on for. That's what I'm trying to say. And I just don't know whether or not we're allocating this money the best way we can without knowing exactly what we're going to get from the state. That's all I'm saying.
Yep.
So I can support the budget as it is, but I just want to know what the flexibility is to move between lines. If we have to have a salary freeze, if we have to do that, I want that to be completed and done. And that money's got to go someplace, is what I'm thinking. Or it's got to be raised through local funds if we don't get the assets from the state.
All right. Thanks, Doug. Amy.
So can I just answer Doug for a second? Sorry, Amy. So just to go back to the idea of moving money from line to line, we can definitely do that without impacting the budget. So I think that, for example, my line and John's line of salary increase, we could take that money out of the line and put that into a contingency in that same article, which gives you, I think, the flexibility that you're asking for. And also it shows the appearance of really what we're actually doing. I think that's probably a very good approach to take.
All right. Thank you. Amy.
I just want to say that I am completely agree with everything that Chelsea said. And I want to just throw out that in a former life, I was a teacher and have been asked to participate in a salary freeze because of extraordinary economic circumstances. And everybody was really happy to do that because they didn't want to see any employees lose their jobs. So if we pay 7% increase to some employees, then what does that do to other employees? And I hope that's taken into consideration. And I'll just say that I currently work in a service industry where I'm working 7 days a week to help the public. And I took a 22.5% pay cut in the last few months. And I was happy to do so because it saved every single job in my company. So I just want to put that on the table.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Gerald.
Thank you. I just want to caution us when we compare percentages because while it's a good shorthand, it's oftentimes is meaningless. So we're looking at an $89,000 increase in our regular instruction budget, which is less than 1% increase. And we're looking at a $15,000 increase in the CTE instruction, and that's a 36% increase. So it's really important to remember that a percentage is important when you're looking at a certain thing, but you can't necessarily compare two percentages. They don't equate oftentimes.
All right, thank you. Other questions, thoughts, or ideas? Yes, Chelsea.
So I just wanted to make sure no one else has anything else to say about this raise issue because I am going to make an amendment. So is there anything people want to say about it? Okay.
Well,
I'd like. Oh,
What? No, I'm going to answer actually. And that
Fine,
is,
go ahead.
I do believe that, like everything, and like I said earlier on, that we don't know what's going to happen this year. We could. One scenario is that the CARES Act 3 money that was sent to states gets converted by Congress and the president to be used for general school funding. And it fills holes everywhere throughout our state. We literally wouldn't have any curtailment. So in that scenario, we wouldn't need changes that you're talking about. And no school district would need that in the state. We may be one of the only districts that decides now to limit the possibility of staff raises that would be very doable because a curtailment never happens. So I will, assuming that you're going to put that up, Chelsea, I'm going to tell you I will vote against it because I think we just stay on the course we have and we keep the staff we have and we keep the way we're going, knowing that it's very likely we're going to have a curtailment and we'll have to deal with all that then. That including the fact that I think the people you're talking about, non-aligned staff, which again is a small number compared to the over 400 people that we have, that John has the ability to bring it forward and we have the ability to say yay or nay on any changes that he makes to anyone's salary in the non-aligned column. Again, that's the only column of people, a very small number, that we have that kind of direct control over in terms of salaries. Everything else is under contract, can't change it. Go ahead, Chelsea.
So Pete, what is the number? And then I'm going to ask you to do some more math, but I'd rather you did the math than I.
I'm trying to get into the network at work. I made a really bad decision and came home for this meeting.
Okay, well, in that case, I'll ramble for a few minutes and then maybe we can, if we have other things we want to talk about, maybe we can talk about those and come back to the amendment. So I agree with a couple of people who have said this is awkward to do it for some staff and not others. So one of the things that I've been thinking about, because actually I want to step back for a second, because I do want to address some of John's concerns. And I want to be clear, this is not like an anti-staff proposal. What this really is that we have an 11% unemployment rate. We have a number of people who are still employed, but have taken significant pay cuts. And I think that particularly in this environment, 7% raises, which are, by the way, why we invest in the stock market for that kind of a return, those raises I think are too high. So the amendment that I'm going to make whenever I get numbers is to actually reduce that so that we're still allowing some flexibility if we get curtailment, but that we're going to be doing it at more like a 3 to 4%, which, as I understand, is the average salary increase for staff. And I think what that does is it allows us to be fair to all staff, because what we're saying is we're not going to ask one type of employee to sacrifice more than another employee, but we have an average 3 to 4% that contracted staff receive. So I think if we align that, I would hope that it would address people's concerns. So, but I don't have numbers, so I don't know how to make the motion.
I'm going in the back way now.
Can you give me some kind of ballpark? Because the main reason I want to do
I
this
think
is
for non-aligned, you're talking probably between $50,000 and $70,000.
and how many employees is that?
It's all the principals, all the directors, all the supervisors. It's the business office hourly staff. It is the special ed hourly staff. So there's 6. It is a lot
I'm
of-
confused because last year when we voted for those raises, which we only did 2 staff members, there were only like 12 people on that list.
There's 2 lists. There's 1 hourly and 1 salary. There was a backside to that piece of paper.
Okay.
Most increases, and you're right, the overall increase in salary is about 3.7%. I'm pretty sure there are no increases in there at 7%. I think you might maybe budget year to budget year, but I know one salary in there was adjusted after the budget was presented. So the actual increase, actual this year versus budget next year is not that. Most increases were based on the 3-year average CPI, which we've been using for New England, which is right around 2.5 or 2.7% for this last 3 years, because there was a big increase in that calculation in one of the years. And they were all, because most contracts have a 0 to 4% performance bonus. So I think that on top of the CPI, there's a 2%. So you might see in the budget around a 4 to 4.5% increase in those lines right now. But that's still not been decided by the board. There's nothing to present it, but going forward, like John said, nothing is going to go up.
I did go through a lot of numbers, and also the person who emailed me, she emailed you as well, Pete. Her numbers aligned with my numbers. So I mean, if you're comparing year over year, we are looking at those increases. And last year, that performance bonus was 0 to 5%. So I think that would be along the lines of a 7% increase.
There's nothing in the budget. I mean, none of those performance increases were put in there except as a budget number of 2%.
So John, you want to go next? You had your hand up, John.
Yeah, I'm trying to formulate how I can say this. I guess, I try to manage the personnel in the district to the best of my ability. And I'm just telling you that I think it's a dire mistake to just unilaterally remove that money from the budget, because ultimately it's up to the board to decide any kind of an increase for an employee who is not in a collective bargaining unit. And in fact, the board bargains with the teachers and the support staff as well. So the superintendent, and I will just say this again, never just raises someone's pay. That's done by the board at the recommendation of the superintendent. And I'm not recommending 7% increases. I don't think, unless there was an adjustment for somebody back along, that I've ever recommended a 7% increase for an employee. So I don't know where that figure's coming from. So nothing's automatic. The board has all the authority, all the power to decide any of that. And if you take it away, again, I'm going to say I think it sends a really, really bad message to a segment of our staff. And I think it's going to be very difficult for me to manage the impact of that. And I can manage talking to people about the situation and the fact that I'm not going to be bringing forward salary increase recommendations to the board. I think it undercuts the office, my office. I understand the thought behind it, but I would implore you not to do that.
So I want to echo everything that John just said, and also say to Chelsea and everybody that it really is a moot point in the sense that we're not going to give those raises to people if we're facing our curtailment in September, October, when we expect it to happen. There's just not going to happen. You know, that saved money from not getting raises up until that point may be part of how we fill the hole that we get. So we preserve a commitment to our staff and everything that John is talking about. And we also preserve the ability not to spend that money at all if we have a huge hole to fill, because we have the ability to wait and wait and wait. Again, I expect the governor to have a supplemental budget coming to the legislature in September. That's the right timing. And then we get everything we get, whatever happens to be in October. Doug, I think your hand was up next.
Yeah, so I want to comment about what Chelsea was talking about just briefly. So Chelsea, you know, my opinion is twofold. One is I agree with John in the respect that if he has, let's say, 3 principals as an example, and he has one principal that's handling 600 kids, and he's got another one that's handling 100 kids, and he's got another one that's handling 300 kids, they may have different requirements and different roles and responsibilities, number of people that they manage, for example, how many teachers, how many staff they manage, and they have a different look. And you have to think about, in my view, you know, how does that compare to, say, Camden or Cape Elizabeth or any other surrounding town? Because I don't have any knowledge about, you know, the 600 teacher principal compared to the 100 teacher principal. How do they get paid in that district? And I have to rely on John to tell me that, to say, hey, here's the base amount of money that a principal should make, and here's the responsibility, and this is the cost savings that these principals have done. So I want to give him the flexibility to move money around in the administration line as he sees fit, to reward principals that are superior, doing a superior job, and take money from principals that maybe not be doing as good a job, or whatever the reason may be that he has. And I don't think it's fair to curtail increases, and I understand about the percentages, from like one group of people when another group of people is getting these increases and we can't do anything about it. So we are caught between a rock and a hard place. I'm not as how do I say it? I'm not as cautious, but at the same time, I want to make sure that whatever we do tonight or tomorrow, or whatever we end up doing, it's the right thing given the amount of information that we have today. I'm not comfortable with the fact that the state is going to provide us X amount of dollars more than they did last year. I definitely am not comfortable with that. But what I want the public to know, and what I want the staff to know, and I want the teachers to know, is that if we don't get this money, we're going to have to take more severe action, i.e. layoffs, furloughs, loss of jobs, like Amy was talking about. So everybody needs to come together and tries to help and do whatever they can on their part. So if we ask the non-aligned staff, if we ask the teachers, if we ask other people not to accept pay raises, you know, if we don't have the money, that's better than laying these people off and destroying everything we tried to build to this point. That's why I was going with a contingency. And if we save $50,000 or $75,000, that's a wonderful thing, and I'm not opposed to it. But I don't think we should just put it on the backs of a few people. I think we should put it on the whole district. That's what I'm thinking. So that's where I'm coming from on this. And I think it's important that you hear it from me because, you know, I don't want to see people laid off. We don't have to lay them off.
All right. Thank you, Doug. And Carol, you are next.
Yeah, I want to make a comment to something that Doug just said about the superintendent moving money around from principal to principal according to what kind of job they're doing. That is not how this works. We do not have merit pay in this district. The contract is made individually with each principal according to the workload, not according to whether on a particular day the superintendent feels that person is doing a good or a better job than someone else. And I think that the public needs to know that's not how things work. So that it's not just on a whim that people are paid. People are paid according to what they negotiate in terms of their salary when they're non-aligned. So that's a very dangerous road to go down if we give the impression that we do merit pay here based on some evaluative process that doesn't exist. So I'm really concerned about that message getting sent out there. And to Chelsea's point, I'm just going to emphasize, I agree with John, don't go there. We leave the money the way it is, knowing that it's not going to get spent unless it's ours to spend. But it sends a terrible message to say to this small group of people, we're going to freeze you without your cooperation to do so. And we won't have any ability to help you out later because we took it out of the budget. So I'm really passionate about these 2 points, and I hope everybody out there is listening.
Thanks, Carol. Further thoughts or ideas? Chelsea.
Amy, I thought I'd see what you think about this because I think you and I are the only ones who are probably on board with this. But so Pete has assured us that nobody is making those salaries. I'm going to have to talk to him later because I don't feel comfortable mentioning line numbers or anything like that. Because I mean, one of the things I've written down in my notes is those percentages. I don't feel comfortable saying that out loud because we're talking about people's salaries. But I do want to follow up on that. But what I'm thinking is, if it's true that I'm mistaken that we have 7% increases, then I don't want to pull that money out. And we do have the ability to limit those to 3 to 4% later if we wanted. So I feel like, Amy, we have the potential to make it not very large raises. But I wanted to see if you would feel comfortable with that approach if I didn't make an amendment, because I don't think it would pass. And there's no reason to rock the boat otherwise. I've already rocked it a lot.
Yeah, and I think it's good that you're throwing these questions out there and giving people food for thought. And I think that philosophically that it makes sense to limit what the raises can be, but practically speaking, you know, in the way that the system works, my point in speaking out is in hopes that people will take to heart the impact of the decisions that they make. Not so much forcing people's hands on making decisions, but rather if everyone could just sit back and take a bit of a holistic perspective. And I didn't mean to make this about me, but as an example, as a former teacher, having been grateful to just have a 0 increase so that everybody kept their jobs. If everybody, you know, I guess there's a lot of conversation about conflict and different people taking stands. And I just feel like we're in a situation where our little community is really hurting right now. And people who have a stake in this game and are looking at it through a very narrow lens, I would like for them to maybe widen their focus a little bit more and think a little more broadly. And maybe as a community all together, we can figure out a way to protect the taxpayers and the people who are unemployed and the teachers and the staff and everyone who we really care about. So I'm less invested in enforcing a cap on a certain level of a raise as I am in getting people to care a little bit more about the community that they're in, and everybody taking on responsibility for maybe a little less of a advancement for this year in the hopes that the whole community is better served.
Okay, thank you, Amy. Chelsea, did you have your hand up again? Did you want to?
It was more of a this, although I do want to speak to my vote right before we vote. So at some point, but I don't want to have dominated the conversation for a little while. So I'm going to step back.
Okay. Other questions, thoughts? Yes, Tom.
So I just want to go back to the regular instruction. Because as I said earlier, it's troubling me. And I know basically we have some retirements and we're not going to fill those. I just want to, do we have a sense yet of how that's going to shake out, what the impact is going to be in certain programs or schools? I'd just like to understand that a little better.
I can talk about that. So our administrative team has been working to think outside the box in terms of meeting students' needs, but also sort of redesigning the system. So the models that we've come up with are more team teaching models, but inclusive of special education teachers. So special education teachers working in concert with regular education teachers. And so, for example, a teacher might not have just one grade level and 20 students, but they might share students amongst two other teachers and all work to their strengths. And I will tell you that the meetings that we've had between administrators and a special education director, curriculum director, and myself have been really exciting. And we've had a good amount of teaching as well in those cases. So we've actually been able to manage the reductions in staff very well in a way that I think is actually going to benefit students and perhaps be an even better model than the single grade level, single teacher model that we've had sort of traditionally. And this is actually a direction that I've wanted to go in for some time. But as everybody knows, change is difficult. And sometimes having your hand forced to some degree is not a bad thing because it gives people a little bit of initiative or a little bit of incentive to think outside the box and to come up with some really creative ways that actually benefit students. So I'm actually quite happy with the way we've risen to that kind of a challenge. And I think it's in the long run, I think it's going to benefit us with some new examples of teaching models that perhaps in this district anyway, really haven't been tried before. So I feel good. I know my administrators are working hard. I think they feel good with what we've developed. And like I said, we've got a fair amount of teacher buy-in too.
In terms of like good news, I do want to share something that I heard yesterday at graduation from Hannah Fazy, who's a key part of our freshman academy team. So this senior class was the first class to be in the freshman academy 4 years ago, the first class to go all the way through. And there were 83 students yesterday, I think, yesterday getting their diplomas, and 76 of them are from the original freshman class. So some people moved out of the district, some people moved in. The graduation number out of 76 students was 74. That's incredible. That's like, you think about graduation rates in the past. That just is incredible. 74 out of 76. And that shows why and how we're doing things right, what really works, why Oceanside is number 10 in the state, and everything great about what we're doing in this district. Everything we're doing together can be seen in one stat. And so in this time of really big challenge and what we may be facing for a new budget number in the fall, remember that. That is absolutely inspiring.
Well, I want to say for those folks that and I see the comments, and people don't know that, denigrate the schools or the performance of the schools. Since I got to Rockland in 2014, I mean, Rockland, when I got there, and I say Rockland area, the RSU, the graduation rate was like 75%. It was terrible, absolutely awful. And the dropout rate was over 5%. That was like one of the highest dropout rates in the state. And we're not anywhere close to that now. We're up in the 90s in terms of our graduation rate, and our dropout rate is like less than 1%. And that US News and World Report's ranking, I think we were down somewhere in the 40s down in 2014. And to go from there to rank number 10, and ranking is not everything, but to go from somewhere down the 40s to number 10, and we're up in the top 10 with Camden, our very advantaged neighbor to the north, with a median income of 55,000 compared to 30 or 31 down in Rockland. We're like rocking the world here in terms of performance. So I don't have concerns about the system being wrecked unless we wreck it. We've got a robust system. We've got great administrators. They're wonderful problem solvers. I can make this budget work. They can make this budget work. I think the teachers can make this budget work. But you got to have a little faith that some of us have some idea about what we're doing, because the results really do speak for themselves. And I'm pretty humble. I'm not blowing my own horn here. I'm saying it's a team effort. We got a good team, and I include the board in that.
Thanks, John. Doug.
So I want to just say the same thing. One of the reasons why I wanted to get on the school board was the fact that our graduation rate was so horrific, in my view. And we were spending more and more money as we consolidated, the RSU together from Thomaston and Rockland. And we were doing a horrible job. And everybody here in this board, and maybe the people listening, know that we were playing musical superintendents. I can't even keep track of how many superintendents that we had. And I want to say one comment about Carol's point, and she may be correct about in how we judge our non-aligned staff. But I want to say one thing about that is, and John, you correct me if I'm wrong on this. I know you had a 5-year contract that you were given, but I think the non-aligned staff, the administration, the other principals, vice principals, whatever, I think they're coming up for their contract renewal. Is that not correct?
Sorry, I had my Zoom kicked out for a second.
Okay.
Yes, the principal's contract ends this year, and they are basically negotiating their way out of being a collective bargaining unit. So they have decided not to pursue a collective bargaining unit contract for their next contract.
All right, so let me just say it this way, and not to be confusing, because we're talking about a big budget here, but I do think that you have some ability within your administrative line to make some of those types of decisions when they renew their contracts. I understand the contracts they have are in stone, and we're not changing those, but when they redo, so for example, if I'm the superintendent and I say, you know what, I'm gonna forego my pay raise this year, and I want to give it to Principal X, I would like to have that opportunity to be able to do that. I'm not saying you should do that, John. I'm just saying that should be within your purview to do it, is what I'm saying.
So my response to that is, I don't do that. What I do is I recommend something to the board, and the board would then approve it. So I don't approve a salary figure with anyone who's a non-aligned employee. I will talk with them, and I will discuss their performance with them, and I will discuss their rate of pay with them and everything else. But the bottom line is, what I do is I bring a recommendation to the board, and the board can either approve it or not approve it, or tell me to do something else. That's entirely up to the board. So I just can't make a decision on my own in terms of their salary. I talk to them, I discuss their position, their performance, their rate of pay, but ultimately those decisions are made by the board.
And that's fine with me as well. I just want to be clear about one thing though. So when we said we can move money within the administration, any line within, say, 5%, I'm asking the question because I don't know the answer. If we have a budget of, say, $1 million for administration, we got to stay within that $1 million unless the board votes to move money from some other line within whatever parameters, percentages that is. I just want to be clear on that, if that's correct.
The board can move 5% from one article to another article, like unless Pete corrects me, but that's.
And let's be clear, Pete, is that per annum or at one time?
I
5%.
believe per year.
Yeah, it must be. Must be a
Okay.
total of the year, yeah.
That's all I have.
Okay, thank you. Other comments, thoughts, ideas? Yes, Tom.
So I just want to loop back on my previous question, and I would echo what John and Lauren said, is that the progress that we've made here as a district is phenomenal, and to get to that level of graduation rate is something that we should celebrate. And I think, you know, we also greatly value your leadership, John, and don't want to micromanage, but this is sort of the one shot that we get to set priorities for the year as a board, and how that budget reflects priorities, and then it's in your court. So, you know, I just want to loop back and ask my question again about what are we losing by having a less than 1% increase in regular instruction? What programs have we been offering that we might not offer? Those kinds of things.
Yeah.
So I'll answer
Well-
that.
Well, can I answer at least part of it?
You're the boss.
I don't know.
Oh,
He's a super.
well, so let's just go back. So we've discussed the need to add another world language position at the middle school. We've talked about filling a tech integrator position that has, you know, largely gone unfilled. There had been requests for 2 additional elementary teachers, I think one at South School and one at Ash Point Community School. Other things like school resource officer and so on. So we know that none of that is going to happen. None of that's going to happen. We have taken that completely off the table. But apart from that, we've got a list of sort of extra programs that we contract with, like Hearing Gut, Leaps of Imagination, and others that, you know, I think many of them we can probably find some grant money to carry us through for a year. And I'm actually reaching out to those folks to say, you know, if we could do that. Stipends for anything that's not required under our sports, those are gone. Professional development's been reduced. I mean, these are things that we've gone through in the budget presentation, and Pete can probably, because I don't have the list in front of me, so Pete could probably provide a more comprehensive list than that. But I mean, those are kind of the highlights. Those are things that we're not going forward with because of trying to present a zero tax impact budget.
So I think like Tom's biggest kind of observation is the 1% increase in general ed in Article 1 and the 7.5% increase in Article 2. Is that right?
Yeah, and the transportation line would be the other big one.
But I do that because one and two are related. We've said all along that we've taken 6 retirements out of the budget. So we are going to move current staff and reposition them into those retired positions. 3 of those positions were in Title I, so federally grant funded positions. So as an exercise, what I did was I moved 3 positions out of Article 1 into the grant funded articles. So that's why, that's where the retirements are showing up right now.
Mhm.
What Neil is working on is how we can actually use that Title I money to supplement our general ed. So actually put those teachers or have them either teach or co-teach in general ed classrooms. So we're actually not going to lose educators in general ed. They'll just be funded through a different federal source. So that's part of the decrease. Yeah, part of the thought process. Another part is we are, and you weren't here last night, were you?
I was not able to be here last night.
So,
no.
so we are, we're mandated. We're mandated to spend as much next year as we are this year on a per student basis in special ed. So
Mhm.
it's called the so part of the thought process is we have to make sure that we maintain that budget on a per student basis. And it made more sense that we keep the money in Article 2 for now, and at the same time, Jess is working on how she can use her resources in Article 2 to support the general ed classrooms. And so she's been working with the principals on ideas of how to do that. And she's here if you want to hear directly from her of what some of those ideas are. But the idea is that we'll actually be using kind of those two articles together to support our teaching in general education.
Jess, do you want to talk about anything?
I can briefly, if that will help. So, I want to start off, Tom, by noting that that's always a concern of mine too. Discrepancy in allocation of resources, and by the nature of my work, it seems like this is a struggle that I have often each year, right? And so, one thing that we have been working on diligently in past years, but even more so this year, just because of the current situation, is how we can leverage the use of special education resources to help everybody, right? So those monies are definitely for and allocated for special education positions and resources and the like. But we're looking at ways to expand the impact of those individuals and those resources to benefit more kids. Because really, our ultimate goal is to prevent referrals to special education and also to dismiss kids from special education, which then kind of translates into a more efficient use of resources, right? So for example, and I'm not sure, as I haven't been at every meeting, how much you've been kind of talking about different models, but really what we're looking at is increasing inclusion-based services so that special educators are able to serve children in special education in the regular classroom in partnership with general education teachers. So essentially, when you establish models like that, special educators are able to work with more kids than just the special education students in the room. So you can kind of divide and conquer, right? Like you can have areas of specialty, and then the services for kids are, boosted significantly. At South School, for example, I know that there was a teacher that had been in the budget, but was removed. And so Justin has been super creative with his team in terms of reorganizing what things look like. And we've been able to contribute special education teachers and special education speech therapists and ed techs, kind of putting everybody in the pot and looking at how to divide the use of those resources. And so what's happened is a model that is more effective for kids and uses special ed resources to help more individuals than they might have otherwise in a pull-out model. So we're really, looking, that's kind of just one example, but we're looking across the board at ways to kind of not only more efficiently, but to maximize the impact of special ed resources, even beyond just special education students when we can. So it's, it's not really picking up the slack, but it's kind of filling the holes in a creative way. And I know that Neil is looking at those kind of creative solutions as well through Title I. And really, as John had mentioned, we're super excited about some of the ways we're going to be approaching services going forward. So this appears to be a win-win. I don't have a better way to say it, but we're really excited. And so I just want you to know that I am constantly looking for ways to do that, at the middle level, at the high school level, whenever we can.
Thanks, Jess. Thank you. Tom.
So I guess I think it's really important for all of us on the board to repeat that making budget decisions are really just about budgets and not a reflection on our opinions of how people do their job. I think we're very fortunate to have the people we have, and that we have to this is our shot at figuring out how to spend the money for the year and what our priorities are. So I think having these discussions is totally separate from, do we think a certain staff or department is doing a good job? Because I think we feel very fortunate about the people we have. So I just worry, to Pete's point, basically, what we spend in special education per student in a year becomes the floor for the next year, right? We can't go backwards, right? But in other areas, we have the flexibility to go backwards, and then it feels like we do sometimes financially. So what is our floor from last year per student that for special ed that we have to not go below for this year? And maybe you don't know that off the top of your head.
So in terms of we have to, and I don't, and I can try to look for that, but we have to maintain maintenance of effort. So, from last year. So whatever the number is, which I don't know, Pete, if you have that, but I can maybe look in my LE here in a little bit. But essentially, if we have 350 students last year and we spent X amount on them, and then we have 370 students the next year, we have to.
It's per student. Right.
Yes, it is.
Yeah,
so we have
right.
to spend that much more. We
Right.
could keep the number the same, but we still have to spend on those extra 20 students the same amount, right?
Sure. Right.
So I'll see if I can dig around for that number, but essentially that's really the concept. So what's fortunate is that if you ever have a decrease in child count, you don't have to spend as much money, but we haven't gotten to a situation where we have a decreasing number of children in special ed yet.
Right.
How does that differentiate different programs? I mean, we know the cost of different programs are quite drastically different.
Sorry. So with maintenance of effort, it doesn't differentiate between programs. So you have to spend the same amount on every special education student, and it's a number, right? So I'll say it's 10,000, right? You have to spend 10,000 per student, regardless of whether or not one child just receives consultation and another child is like in ISP. So they don't discriminate between programming when they're calculating that number.
So if we graduated one student that was going to a special purpose private school one year and brought in a resource room student that just needs a little bit of help here and there, this calculation doesn't consider that.
So sometimes we have exceptions, and those are more like there are some mandated exceptions. So for example, the decrease in child count is the big one. Another one is like sometimes you have salaries of staff in kind of, those monies. And so if you have a person at the top of the scale retire and hire somebody who is kind of coming in at a step one or something and makes less money, that's kind of an acceptable exceptions. So there are a few, but there's nothing across the board to delineate between the amount of money one student costs as compared to the amount of money another student costs.
So back to those positions, there's no definitive plan right now as to where those positions will end up being removed from those retirees, they could come from Article 2.
Mhm.
We just felt that this is where we put it for now. We had the more flexibility this way.
I'm always going to always jump in on this discussion to quickly say once again that the federal government has created federal law to support our kids in special ed. We have to comply with federal law. I support it 1000%, but I'm so angry every year they never fully fund it. They say, here, do this wonderful thing for kids. We're never going to give you full funding. And by the way, no child ever chose to have a disability. No parents ever chose for their child to have a disability. And we just do the best we humanly can in our district to help meet their needs within the law and within what our budget can hopefully afford. Tom, did you want to go further before? And Chelsea, do you want to talk on this issue or a different issue?
I just had a question to follow up with Jess. So on
Right.
this issue, Jess, so I didn't realize that maintenance of student law was that specific. So I'm wondering, does it account for if we have a student who's moving towards dismissal, so they need fewer and fewer services, we still have to fund at the same rate? Or am I misunderstanding that?
Yeah, you're right. It's on a per student basis based on child count. So, like within our number of special ed students, we have we're reducing services, which is super. But really, for this figure, they don't really help us out or count financially, or like as an exception to a child count until they're dismissed, right? Until that number is down by 1. But as we're reducing services along the least restrictive environment continuum, they still cost the same. They, like we still have to spend the same amount on that student. And what happens, obviously, is you end up spending more on certain kids and certain programs and less on them. I mean, it balances out, but for the purposes of the calculation, it's the same across the board. So just in looking kind of at my numbers, and I pulled this up quickly, it looks like our number for 1920, and Pete, you can, I think this is the right one, is $18,336.84. So that's like our floor, right? Like, we have to spend that, at least that much on every child going forward.
Right. And so what average is this year's budget built on?
So average in terms of those expenditures?
Yeah, what is that number for the 2021 budget?
We didn't build the budget around a number. We were just trying to protect that number in the way we actually put the things together. We weren't calculating that because we don't know exactly what that number is going to be.
Right.
We were just
You'd have to estimate the number of students you're going to have.
right, which just does. We just wanted to make sure we protected that number.
But I guess what I'm saying is, if we have once you approve a higher number, you can never go back, right, for special ed.
Well,
So-
You always have to spend at least that much or more the next year.
If you don't have certain allowable decreases or decreases in child count.
Mhm.
So, right.
Again, I want to be very clear that the discussions about the budget aren't anything to do with satisfaction with what's being
No,
delivered.
No, like Todd,
Yeah.
you're so nice to give those disclaimers. I
Yeah.
completely understand. So,
Mhm.
I mean, we're looking, we look to, when we budget, I don't say, all right, I don't necessarily say, I know I have to spend X amount of money, right? Like we say, like, this is what we need to serve our students.
Right.
And then, like then Pete has to look at it through different lenses. Like, okay, so are we meeting maintenance of effort so we maintain federal monies, or meet the requirements of the law? Are we doing, those sorts of things? Can we back off on this? All of that sort of calculation. So that's one consideration in terms of the budgeting. because as you know, sometimes we will get children who, I mean, 18,000, some odd dollars is a lot of money, but for a child in an out of district placement, we
It
spend
doesn't come close.
$80,000 on their
Right.
tuition, right? So those are kind of things that we have to accommodate for as well.
Sure, right.
And we don't spend just to hit that number either. We don't
Right.
try to make sure we spend that. If we can actually do things more efficiently, I think then we'll have to go back and ask the DOE or the federal government for a waiver for that and explain why we've done something different.
Okay, so Doug, do you have a question on this issue?
Yeah, yes, Lauren, I do.
Okay.
Pete, this question is for you. I know you've explained this to me before, but I've gone brain dump on this. I don't know where we haven't had a talk or a meeting with reimbursement from St. George for quite a while. And I understand that was part of, I don't know if it's part of this budget year or past budget years or whatever it is. I don't know, a lot of that money was for special education. Did we ever receive any of this money from St. George? Have we resolved that? And does it have any impact on this budget going forward?
It has no impact on the budget.
Okay. Tom, you started the sort of discussion of the special ed staff. Are you satisfied? Get your answers that you need? You have more?
Transportation.
No, I think I understand. I just, and to Jess's point, I think it's great to, look at ways to utilize special ed staff to support regular education too. But I guess I would also say that then those expenses then get added into this, floor of money, right? That we have to then spend at least that much in the future, if, so I worry about that a little bit too. And that,
So just to clarify that point really just quickly, we didn't add special ed staff to help
I
with
hear
that
ya.
model, right?
Right,
Okay. I
right,
mean,
right.
so we are utilizing existing staff differently to work with more kids, right?
So it doesn't change what you would spend.
Just wanted
Right.
to make sure that was clear.
Sure. So,
And if we do move a special ed staff member into general ed, the money will follow. We're not just going to book it in Article 2 if they're really performing general ed duties.
sure, right. But
So-
moving them to general ed would then, make some level of change in the average cost of special ed that becomes the floor for next year, right?
Right, but we still just, we're still going to operate, what's best for kids, whether it's a general ed expenditure or a special ed expenditure.
Right.
We in past years, back in 2015, 16, and 17, special ed was usually that article that we did that 5% transfer from, that we actually underspent that article and that used, to fund some of the over expenditures and other articles that we budgeted.
Right. So, okay, well, I've kind of beat this to death probably. So I just want to, one last thing and then I'll stop talking is, can you just, I want to go back to transportation because that's also a significant change and understand why that is.
So what we talked about last night when we, I did answer your question last night. Sorry you weren't here. But I wanted, I just kind of wanted to say off the, out of the gate is, I think of transportation as part of overall operations. So I see transportation as part of, as part of the operations, which includes facilities, buildings and grounds. We have a lot of staff that we share between both departments. We have a number of bus driver custodians. We've got a bunch of shared staff at the administrative level that do both. We have custodians that will fill in for bus drivers and bus drivers that will fill in for custodians. So I look at the two together, and that's where I think that I'd like you to look at the two together, those two articles together, because that's where some of the movement went from. I moved a number of bus driver custodians that were split between facilities and transportation, and I put them fully in transportation with the idea that, in the summer, we need drivers more than we need drivers doing custodial work and then hiring other drivers to do the driving work, which has been happening in the past. So this budget includes actually putting 100% of the driver's salary that are full-time, full year into that budget. It also, the biggest thing is really, the big increase, which is less than the increase from February, was adjusting the hours of the drivers to what we've actually been spending. I think through the transportation committee, you're aware that we have a lot of van drivers that were budgeted for the school year that end up working a lot more. They're doing not only trips to some of our out of district placements in special ed, but they're doing a lot of transporting students between schools for tutoring, or bringing kids in that can't be in school for a full day. So they would basically act as a bus for a half day of students. And then we have a lot of students that were utilizing transportation in the summer. So a lot of this budget increase was just fixing the budget number of hours for those drivers to kind of align it to what we've actually been spending. So we've been overspending that article, and while we're still trying to work on controlling that, this just represents the actual budgeted number of hours for them.
And what's the, how do we control overtime, I guess? Not to get too far into the weeds, but is there a significant amount of overtime that goes into that?
There's been a lot of overtime, and that's just working with the director to curtail that, really, to really make sure that we turn down trips. If we don't have a driver that we can tap before they hit their 40 hours in a week, making sure that, with some of these field trips, that they're funded by the organization that is sponsoring it. That was something that we seem to have gotten away with years ago. A lot of those field trips that we do for the schools were actually fundraised by the parents, or were sponsored by the organization. The Farnsworth does a great job. They actually reimburse all our transportation to all our Farnsworth trips, but we've gotten away from that. So it's a matter of managing that, and that's what we're planning to do right now.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Further questions, thoughts, or ideas? All right. Seeing none, we're going, yes, Chelsea.
I did want to just speak to my vote. It looks like Doug wants to talk to you. I'll go ahead, Doug, if that's okay, unless you want to go.
I just have a point of order. I heard a motion by Carol. I did not hear a second.
Susan.
Susan.
Susan seconded.
Okay.
Chelsea.
So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the budget process, and from the perspective of a new board member, because I've been on the board now about 1.5 years, and it's my second budget cycle. And I know a lot of you have been on the board for a lot longer, so the process isn't as unfamiliar. But I wanted to talk about it, and at the end, make a recommendation. And basically, I'm going to go back to last year's budget, because last year was my first year on the board. And we did budget presentations, and we didn't really talk about budget numbers in those presentations. And then I got the numbers a week before we were expected to vote. So I felt like I had time to do basic diligence, but not really due diligence. But we talked about it in this meeting last year, and we're talking about having the board be more involved in the process. And so I felt comfortable voting for it because I thought staff did a good job developing the budget. I trust that they're developing responsible budgets, and I felt like we would be more involved in the future year. And this year obviously has been very different with the coronavirus. But I want to talk a little bit about what's been happening on the Finance and Facilities Committee before the coronavirus. Because we've been scheduling budget meetings to talk to departments, and then we've been canceling them. So we actually scheduled 14 meetings, and we had 4. And so, particularly as a new board member, I feel like I haven't really had the chance to talk to department heads, ask questions. I may still be confused about how to read the budget. I'm going to ask Pete some questions about that. So I think that we need to, I've been feeling like we need to spend a little more time on the budget process. Obviously, the coronavirus was a huge disruption. But when staff started preparing the budget, I talked to Gerald and asked if we could have some finance committee meetings, and we never scheduled them. And when Lauren made the proposal to, again, have budget numbers a week before we voted, I expressed some concerns about that. And so I feel like, once again, I'm faced with having to vote on a budget that I don't feel like I've done due diligence on. So this year I am going to actually vote no on the budget. And I want to be clear, I think staff did a fantastic job getting this down to 0%. And I'm really happy to hear about the conversations we're having about how do we actually make long-term structural changes. I think those are really strong. But I really do think the board should be more involved in that process. I don't know if people have had a chance to read the email that came out from the MSBA, which is the Maine School Boards Association, but they had a recent newsletter that was talking about the balls that we have to juggle as board members. And they were talking about operational guidance and the board's role in the budget and accountability. And those are some balls that I think we probably need to strengthen our juggling skills with. And what I'd really like us to do is commit to having the Finance and Facilities Committee, or even a separate ad hoc budget committee, go through the budget next year, line by line, and really work with staff as they're developing these structural changes. Because a lot of that engages with our strategic priorities, and a lot of it engages with policy decisions. And I really would like to see more board engagement in that. So I'm hopeful that we can do that. But I do feel that in the past year, even though I'm on the Finance and Facilities Committee, there are still a lot of holes in my knowledge of the budget. And I hope that we'll be changing that.
Yeah, I would say that, we started with our schedule of the budget hearings with the committee, and we're going along. And then the week that ended on Friday, March 13th, things just fell apart in society and in the structure of things like a school budget and school board. So that I remember talking to John all week, every day that week. What are we doing? What are we doing? What are we doing? And it turned out that Friday, March 13th was the last day of school. After that, with everything getting canceled and moving to online, it just took on a life of its own, and just not being a normal budget year, the normal discussions and explorations that you're obviously talking about. We would have typically finished up everything by the end of April and had this vote on the first Thursday business meeting of May. And then by now we would have had, the public meeting, and then, boy, the primary would have been Tuesday this week. So anyway, I asked John and Pete to wait until the very last minute, because putting John's budget to us the end of May, because I was hoping we'd get numbers from the state. I was hoping that we'd get, hey, this is what you're going to have to deal with, but they couldn't do it. They didn't want to be premature in predicting numbers and revenues, and so we didn't get numbers. It just didn't turn out the way I hoped it might happen, so it didn't. So in the case of, we get to this point where we're voting on this budget, and I actually asked John and Pete to present it last week, and then have, I think, 2 weeks of conversations of the finance committee or public or whatever going on, and then have a final vote next Thursday. But then the governor's executive order, that's the right name, came out saying, nope, got to get it done by this Thursday. So that changed things again, you know. So Chelsea, I really hear what you're saying and I respect what you're saying. And normally we can and we would go so much deeper, but it is a global pandemic and everything that goes with it. So it's different this year. And I think we are doing a remarkably great job in giving overall this zero impact to taxpayers' budget and knowing that we're going to come back to our budget in the fall. We're just going to come back to it. We don't know what that's going to be like, but we're going to come back. And I urge everybody in every town and every family and every staff person to know, yep, we'll be coming back to something. And we'll see what that turns out to be. But I'm very, very happy that we are producing a zero impact to taxpayers budget tonight. And given, in fact, you know, Chelsea, what you're saying, we didn't have the process we normally would and should have. We just couldn't. Carol, I think you had your hand up.
Yes, I just wanted to say that in the past, and only Lauren and I are aware of this because it changed once we changed administration. But we used to go through a very exhaustive process, line by line, that changed every meeting, and we would get a whole new set of papers with lines that were changed. And it was so heavy-handed that it was easy to get lost in the sheer volume. And so when Pete and John came on board, the process was streamlined and we went to significant points rather than every comma. And when I say every comma, I mean it was that detailed. And it was so overwhelming that it was easier then to not know where we were than it is now. And to Lauren's point, you know, everything changed on March 13th, everything. And so I would urge you, Chelsea, to vote for this budget and then come back in the next budget season with some suggestions and ideas about how you think that the process would work better. Not better than this year, but better than last year. So I think it also sends a strong message to the community when we as a board support the budget that the superintendent and business manager present to us. It's not a good optic to have someone dissent without the people going to the ballot box knowing that it's a procedural matter that caused the dissent. So I would urge you to, and I'm just going to say this in a kind of a crude way, suck it up and vote for it this time and come back to us with clear ideas for next year. That's my plea.
Okay. Thank you. Other thoughts and ideas at this time? Yes, Amy.
I would just like to urge the board members to have respect for each other, having opinions that are different from their others. And I feel like speaking out about possible different options of things is not necessarily a bad thing. Being we live in an environment where being a soldier who marches behind leadership, regardless of what they're doing, isn't necessarily the way to go about doing things. So
I'm not suggesting that.
I just let me finish. I think that John and I think that Pete are doing a fabulous job. I think Lauren's doing a fabulous job. I think everybody on the school board feels very passionately about the community and they want to do well, but I don't like hearing school board members be condescending to other school board members. And I just want to say
I was not being condescending, Amy.
Or Carol, you were being condescending.
No, I was making a plea. There's a big difference.
All right. So, all right. So, anything else? We're going to go right to the vote on the budget now, right? We're clear on that. So unless anything else comes up right at the second, The superintendent will call the roll on the motion on the floor, which is to adopt the superintendent's budget.
Lauren Andrews,
Yes.
Carol Backoffner,
Aye.
Doug Curtis Jr.,
Yes.
Tom Pico,
Yes.
Mark Lewis,
Yes.
Susan Thomas,
Yes.
Chelsea Everett,
No.
Gerald Winan,
Yes.
Amy Williams Beers.
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right. Thank you all. Tough year, tough times. We'll come back to this. Keep your gas tank full. We're gonna have to come back sometime in the fall. I'm now going to make a motion that relates to the budget. All right, something we have to do procedurally. And Carol, I thank you in advance as vice chair to second this. I move that the vote entitled, quote, vote to call the district budget referendum, call a public hearing, approve the referendum warrants, and approve the notice of public hearing, end quote, be approved in form presented to this meeting, and that a copy of said vote be included with the minutes of this meeting. Any discussion on this motion? Seeing none, the superintendent will call the roll.
Lauren Andrews,
Yes.
Carol Backoffner,
Aye.
Doug Curtis Jr.,
Yes.
Tom Pico,
Yes.
Mark Lewis,
Yes.
Susan Thomas,
Yes.
Chelsea Everett,
Yes.
Gerald Winan,
Yes.
Amy Williams Beers.
Yes.
Unanimous.
All right, thank you. We're now going to move to a quick item. I believe it's business item 5B to authorize the superintendent to hire and issue contracts during the summer. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Susan, and seconded Carol. And John, you want to briefly describe what this is about? I think he's writing the vote, so we'll give him a couple minutes here.
Thank you. Yeah, this just authorizes me to issue contracts for open positions. It doesn't give me authorization to create new positions. So just the very few that we have left open without having to hold a board meeting gives me a little bit of flexibility.
Yeah, we do this every year, right? We have the same motion and. same
Yeah,
thing.
it's just, it becomes time critical in the summer, and rather than call a special meeting to hire on one teacher, it just gives me the ability to do that. And then the board later on gets that information and does take a formal vote.
All right, unless there are any questions, the superintendent will call the roll on this motion.
Lauren Andrews,
Yes.
Carol Backoffner,
Aye.
Doug Curtis Jr.,
Yes.
Tom Pico,
Yes.
Mark Lewis,
Yes.
Susan Thomas,
Yes.
Chelsea Everett,
Yes.
Gerald Winan,
Yes.
Amy Williams Beers.
Yes.
Whoops.
Unanimous.
All right, thank you. Before adjournment, I just want to explain what's coming up for us as a board. We're going to meet 2 weeks from tomorrow night on June 25th, at which time we'll have a public hearing as we are instructed to do, at which time we will elect chair and vice chair for the coming year, and at which time we will hear from John and Stephanie on school planning. I know that the staff got together after the students left and did a lot of planning, and we just want to hear about that and talk about that. It's a workshop style meeting at that point and talking about those issues and anything else that you come up with. If you have questions related to anything about where we're at right now, how we're dealing with things and how John and Stephanie expect things to go in the fall, just bring them. Bring your questions and we'll have a workshop style meeting for that. In July, we normally take the month of July off, which is I think well deserved, but we'll have to see what we have to do. We just have to be available. If you're on vacation, you're on vacation. Don't worry about it. But basically, the plan is to resume in August like normal with our business meeting on the first Thursday, our workshop on the third Thursday. Committees need to start meeting again in normal fashion. We're going to be probably Zoom, but we don't know.
Right.
But we want to meet and do life in normal fashion, just like our staff and students will be doing the best they can in the fall in normal fashion. So that is generally speaking the idea. John, anything you want to add to that that's in your mind?
No, I think you've covered it. You know, Stephanie and I will share with you our planning document. We'll share with you how the board is involved in planning and ultimately approving our plans for the fall and going forward in terms of setting priorities. So just know that you all definitely have a voice in that and a role to play in that. I just want to assure you of that. And, you know, we'll take what time we need to do that. And I will, of course, be in touch with all of you. I'm really not going anywhere. I don't really have anywhere to go at this point in time. So I'll be on deck, and if things come up that we need to address as a board, I will contact Lauren and Carol, and we will get the word out there and have a meeting.
Okay,
Can you give me the date, Lauren, for the workshop by
Thursday, June 25,
June 25? And that will be at 6 or 6:30?
6.
Okay,
Tom?
thank you. And we sign warrants tomorrow at McLean?
Yes, so first of all, thank you for passing the budget without the changes, because that would require a lot of work and new ballots and everything that took me about 9 hours today working on. I'm usually prepared during the budget meeting, but this format is different. So yeah, so if you're not comfortable doing that, you can either sign them at your house and scan them or take a picture of them. You only need to sign one of each this year. So it's going to be quite easy. If you want to come by the building, we'll be there probably by 8 o'clock tomorrow, maybe 7:30, and there all day. So it'll be a quick visit with only 6 signatures necessary.
So to be clear, Pete, we can either print out what you emailed us or do it on our device, sign it, and then scan it if we printed it out, or just send it back signed to you, one each on those towns, and we're good, right?
Correct. Use the same line on each form. Your name's listed on it.
Oh, okay.
It's like a coloring by numbers. I think we got that.
Yep. There are 6 documents, and each one needs a signature.
All right. Tom, actually, Tom, then Chelsea. Tom, go ahead.
Can we just talk a little bit about what the public participation is going to look like on June 25th? How will the public engage? Is it going to be the same with sending emails in, or is it a Zoom, or how's that going to work?
It's set up as a like the last 2 nights, with comments being sent by email. I'm not sure how to do that in a secure way any other way. You know, we've struggled with how to get without making it too complicated. You know, send for a password and get a password that way. It was something we didn't want to just post a password on the website. So right now it's slated to be just like, it'll be a board meeting with public comment through email.
Thank you.
Comments at rsu13.org. Yep. Chelsea.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify whether that was Zoom or in person. So we're set.
Seeing nothing else, Gerald, thank you for moving to adjourn, and Doug for seconding that motion. And you're all wonderful, and see you soon. Take care.
Do whatever you want.
Right.
I mean, that was the adjournment, correct?
That was the adjournment. Yep.
I'm not that asleep. Okay, I'm leaving you. Thank you very much. Thank you for your service.
Thank you.